I have no idea. I was going to say that, like, I don't know what to do.
So the Dave Letterman show, he was like
Yeah.
a real pioneer in late night TV.
Right.
His band director was this hilarious guy named Paul Schaefer.
Oh.
And when Dave, would kind of get stuck with something, he turned to Paul and he'd say, "Hey, Paul, what do you?" And then he was just there, Johnny on the spot. So
I see. Now it's Mission Impossible.
Hey, good morning. Can you guys hear me all right? Is this thing on? Can you hear me okay? Hey, I don't know, this doesn't feel hot enough. Yeah. I'll get a little louder. Hey, welcome to another riveting installment of Psych 320 Personality Psychology. So delighted to see your smiling faces yet again today. Now, by the way, you notice I use that word riveting. I use that word a lot, apparently, and I got to tell you a story. You ready for this? So about 3 years ago, maybe 4, it was when I first decided that I would go ahead and capture through the Echo Center system. And by the way, if you missed Tuesday for some reason, I know some of you had to miss, I would encourage you to go into Blackboard on the course website, and it'll say over on the left as you screen capture, and just tunnel through that portal, and you will actually find you should find a complete video of Tuesday's class time. Now, so right after I did that, a student wrote me, and it was hilarious. She said, "Hey, Dr. Lee, I'm so glad you put up those lecture videos, but I have to tell you," and she said, "and don't be mad, but my friends and I, who are in the class, we go back and we watch those videos together, and we've made it into a drinking game." I was like, "What?" And then she gave me the list of rules. I'm not going to bring them in because I don't want to encourage it. You can make up your own if you really feel so inspired. But the word riveting may or may not have been associated with taking a shot. So I found that really hilarious. Anyway, I'm so proud of you for braving the elements in your thirst for knowledge. Here you are. It's impressive. Now, we got a lot of ground to cover today. I got a couple of quick public service announcements, though, before we launch into lecture proper. First, if you came in a little bit late, or if you just were wondering what's going on this morning, we have these lovely 8.5 by 11 cut in half, so I guess that would make it 8.5 by 5.5 cardstock paper. This is your official Psych 320 name tag, and it has at least 2 purposes. We also have markers up here. You are welcome to make your name tag at the end of class today. We'll also have it up here all next week and probably a little bit the week after. So 2 purposes. One, we are putting together a class photo roster, and so what we want to do is get an updated photo for all of you, and be like a mugshot, basically, where you can, it's pretty awesome. Can I borrow somebody's name tag? Can I borrow one? Thank you very much, Jack. So, you just sort of stand there like this, right, with your name tag, and then our intrepid teaching assistant, Corey, is going to, he'll take your photo if you're willing. Now, by the way, this is completely optional. But did I mention that you can get 1 point of extra credit for having your photo taken for us? Now, it would not be fair if for some reason you're a little skittish about having a photo taken. You can get your 1 point by writing an essay about why you don't want to have your photo taken, okay? If that's your jam, you can go that way. But for the rest of us, hopefully, you will at some point in the next couple of weeks come up and get your photo. By the way, can I also just put in a humble request that for the rest of the semester, just to help me put your name to your face, that you keep exactly the same hairstyle. And wear exactly the same top, okay? I'm kidding, but that would help me probably, because I'm not great with faces. I'm pretty good with names, but not great. So anyway, we'll do that. And then the second thing is every time, remember, you participate in class. Every time you ask a question, every time you make a comment or respond to something that I've said, you get 1 point extra credit. You have to claim it. And I'll say more about that in a second. But I'm going to ask you to hold up your name tag so I can call on you by name. Now, today I'll make an exception since I know many had a chance to make your name tag. Next Tuesday, I'm only going to call, you guys paying attention yet? Next Tuesday, I'm only going to call on people that actually have their name tag. Okay? So I'll try to be a really good behavioral psychologist and only reinforce people that actually have their name tag. Everybody else I'm going to put on an extinction schedule, and try to just ignore it. I'm a terrible, terrible, terrible behavioral psychologist, though. So, hopefully Corey will remind me. So that's that. Jack, you probably want your name. Thank you very much. Claiming your extra credit. Now, if you have already taken your class photo earlier today, we don't know who you are. All we have now is your first name. So what I want to ask you to do, if you would, is right after class, I'm going to start a little extra credit sign-up sheet. You can just come and write your full name and your ID on that so we can get you credit for that. If you take it afterwards, same thing. If you participate in class, if you participate in lecture, you have to claim that 1 point of extra credit toward the next exam within 24 hours of making that comment. How do you do so, you may ask? You email our other TA, who's not here today. She's at the Med Center doing an internship. Her name is Araba Kofi, and her email is on the syllabus, which is posted on Blackboard. Okay, everybody good? That's just a little housekeeping we had to do before we launch into lecture. Anybody have any questions about anything class-related? Everybody? Oh, you don't have your name tag, but it's... You do, dude. Okay, let's get into the... Yeah, Jeremy, go ahead.
If you don't get called on, do you still get extra credit?
Jeremy, that is such a great question. So if you couldn't hear Jeremy, and by the way, Corey and we're going to do this experiment this semester. Do you see he's Johnny on the spot? He's got the mic. You got the Oprah mic, which is awesome. Or maybe the Vegas lounge singer mic. I don't know. If you feel inspired to break into song, at some point, that's fine too. I get inspired that way sometimes. We are going to we're going to play kind of zone, right? Where he's got that half of class, I got this half, and so that everybody can hear. When somebody asks a question or comment, we're going to try to remember to put you on mic. I don't know what we're going to do with somebody.
Yeah,
I guess whoever just gets to him first, probably. So anyway, the question was, you want to repeat the question on mic just so, I got to climb stuff to get to you, man. This is hard. Okay, go ahead.
If you have something that you wanted to add, but you didn't get called on, do you still get extra credit if you submit it to the TA?
Yeah, okay. So here's how we play that. If you have raised your hand and for some reason your card and I didn't call on you, you can still get credit. But here's what you got to do. You got to email both Araba and CC me on it, so both of us, and say, here's what I was going to say, or here's what I was going to, and Dr. Lardy didn't see me or didn't get there, too many people had their hands up or whatever. And you'll still get credit. But wait, it gets better. It gets better. Okay, this is going to make many of you very happy. How many of you find it at least a little bit intimidating, the thought of speaking on mic in front of 270 of your class? How many of you find that somewhat intimidating? How many of you are like, oh, hell no? Like, okay. I'm going to try to inspire all of you that just raised your hand to get out of your comfort zone at some point. But here's the deal. If you have a comment that you want to make, but you're feeling, for whatever reason, not comfortable making it, you can email me that comment. Say, here's what was going on in lecture, and here's what I wanted to say, but I was too... Can I say it? I'm just going to say it. I don't mean to offend you. I was too chicken shit to... No. I felt too anxious to say it. And so... and by the way, no judgment on that. I get it. When I was an undergrad, I took one class that was the largest class I ever took. It was only 150 students, but still, I remember one time got called on in front of 150 of my classmates, and I thought my heart was going to pound out of my chest. I mean, have you ever had that? Where it's just like my mouth went dry. I was trembling. It was insane. I didn't see it coming, in part. But anyway, I get it. So if you are more introverted, if you're more reserved, you can still get credit for that. Okay, anything else? Before we launch into lecture proper today, though, I thought I would read a couple of, here they are. You remember you guys filled out these lovely data sheets where you gave me information about yourself, and I've been having a blast reading through those. I haven't finished everything. In fact, I get so kind of mesmerized by the stuff you guys are writing that I kind of linger over it and ponder it a little bit. Some of the questions that you guys have raised, remember I asked you for like one burning question that you want to be sure that's addressed this semester? Some of them are really ponderous. So, and then some of the stories. This story, I'm just going to start you with a story. Remember I asked for like a happy memory? There's so many of them. They're not all. But so this student says, so when I was 5, I was a giraffe for Halloween, which is already adorable, right? A giraffe for Halloween, she's 5. And then I found out the day before that I had pneumonia, so she can't go trick-or-treating. So the night of Halloween, my parents had me go upstairs from door to door until I had a full basket of candy. Isn't that awesome? It just makes me, I know, it's just so freaking adorable. And then she goes on to ask a really interesting question. Here's her burning question. It says, hey, Dr. Lardy, what do you love most about teaching? First of all, who said I love teaching? No, it shows, right? Apparently, it shows. I do love teaching very much. Now, instead of answering the question directly, I thought I would make it a fun game, not a drinking game, as far as I know. I would ask, okay, you sort of put on your empathic imagination cap. Anybody here, can I just see a show of hands? How many of you think there's at least some remote possibility at some point in the future you might actually do some teaching of some sort? Okay, several of you. I actually had that intuition myself as an undergrad. Do you remember as a little kid, did you ever have this feeling when your parents were doing something? They were, being parents, they were doing the parent thing, and you're sitting back looking at them like, damn, I will never do that to my kids. Did you ever have that feeling? Like I would, when I'm a parent, I'm going to do it differently. How many of you ever had that feeling? Like I would totally do it differently when and maybe some things you'd be like, oh, that was good. Yeah, I totally want to do that when I'm a parent. When I was an undergrad, I would sit where you're, not literally because I didn't go to KU, but I would sit where you're sitting, and I had this almost like a premonition. Like, I'm going to be doing that someday. I just felt it in my bones. I'm going to be doing that someday. And I was taking notes, and I was like kind of critiquing, like, hell no, I would never do that. I would never inflict that shit on my students. One of my pet peeves, by the way, was the horridly ambiguous true-false question. You know what I mean? The true-false question? Oh, fuck. If you want to write an essay, it's like, well, this is a sorry-ass question, but if by the question you mean this, then the answer is clearly true for these reasons. But if instead you mean this, then it's clearly false for these reasons. Right? You ever want to write an essay? Where was I? Oh, so anyway, some of you actually think you may become an instructor someday. Others of you just have to imagine. So here's the question, and you get to play along. What do you think you would love most about teaching? Or what do you think any person would love most about teaching, assuming they loved it? What do you think? Who haven't I heard from? Yeah. TJ, what do you got?
Getting paid.
Getting paid. TJ, I hate to burst your bubble on this one, man, but I don't know anybody that does this for the big bucks. I mean, we do. It is a steady paycheck. It is totally a steady. We do get paid there, and you know what? I'm grateful for it every 2 weeks. But I was actually making more money. I didn't. This is a long story, and okay, so super quick. I'm just going to tell you this, TJ, since you brought it up. I never took a psych class as an undergrad. I was not a psych major. I never took any psych. I was a math, econ, programmer, wrote code. I was 24, working for Wells Fargo Realty, making more money than I made 9 years later when I started at KU as a tenure track professor. So Now, I'm way happier now. But I just, it is a good living, but I don't think anybody does this. But that's an interesting thought. Yeah, go ahead.
The relationship that you would have later on with certain students, like you form relationships with certain ones, I think.
That's good. So it's not just about what happens in class, but like actually forming connections. Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the things that makes me is when I hear from former students. I get emails. I got an email last year from a student that I had taught 17 years ago. I was at the Merck, not buddy on staff there, who told me, I didn't recognize her, I have to be honest, because she was like, yeah, I was in your very first semester at KU. I was in your personality class, and I've still got my final project that I wrote in that class 20 years ago, breaking down my personality, and I was going through some old memorabilia last year, and I ran across it, and I read it, and I was like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing, but also really, really cool that she had this time capsule of what she did. Yeah, okay. Seeing former students, what else? What else? Oh, good. Go ahead, Corey.
It gives you an audience to talk about something you're passionate for.
Yeah, can you say more about that?
I assume you are really interested in psychology, and you get to share your knowledge about psychology with a group of, 300 people.
Yeah, this is good. Do you guys get that? There's something about, do you ever have this thing where like you're really, really excited or passionate about something, or have you ever had that annoying friend that's like got this new thing that they're really into and it's all they want to talk about? And you're just like, oh my God, that's all they talk about, but they're really into it. And when we're excited about something, we want to share it. And if I can put a positive spin on it, hopefully, I think there is something amazing about the experience of introducing somebody else to something that they've never seen before or they've never thought of before, and watching that look of discovery, that look of like, oh my God, this is cool, and sharing that, like, this is so cool thing together. There's something amazing about that, and it never, ever, ever gets old. Absolutely. And tell us your name.
Athena. I think personally, and I'm sure that it probably carries over to most teachers, being able to take something similar that you're passionate about and pour it into these lives here so that we can take it and then further it into the larger world that we're all in, a part of as humanity.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Athena. That's a really deep sort of thought. I don't know if you guys caught that. But do you ever think about like people in your life that either you have influenced or you're going to influence, and that there's a multiplier effect? Because if you can just make the world a better place for one person, then every person they encounter, every person they touch, there's a chance for that to kind of ripple forward, like a pebble thrown into a pond, and the ripples sort of spread out. And I do think there's a really interesting multiplier effect that comes with teaching. In fact, I've been thinking about that a lot with my clinical practice, because for a long time, when I was on internship, I think I probably saw about 40 patients a week. And I had an impact on those 40 patients. But now, as a clinical researcher and trainer, I'm training psychologists that are going to be, reaching thousands of, so it's really cool. Okay, well, we could go on for a long time. That's a great note to end on with that. So which is my favorite? It's kind of like asking a parent, like, which is their favorite child, And, by the way, I just said that, and now I'm going to totally call BS on myself. There was a study, did you know about this? There was a study that they got parents isolated from everybody, and they're like, okay, we're totally not recording this, and we're not going to tell anybody. You have our total confidential trust. Nobody will ever find out. And everybody says that they do not have a favorite child, but we know that many people do. So level with us. Spill it. Do you have a favorite child? Almost 60% of parents said, yes, I have a favorite. Don't tell anybody. Oh, wait, it gets better. Do we have any youngest children, babies of the family? here? Well, God bless you one and all, because, yeah, you know what's coming, right? Any fellow oldest? I'm the oldest of 4. Yeah, it sucks to be the oldest. You know why? Because the parents said in 80% of the cases where they had a favorite child, it was the baby. I know. Oh, by the way, you middle kids, I'm really sorry. Because you kind of often, there are exceptions, but generally tend to get the short end of that particular draw. Okay, I want to read one more thing, and then I promise, we'll actually do psychology. We're kind of doing psychology. Can you tell? We're actually doing a little psychology right now. Notice I'm dropping a couple little nuggets of information as we go. By the way, that could actually show up on an exam, right? So I hope you haven't just been totally tuning out. If you've been tuning out and, like checking your Twittergram or whatever, I'm kidding. I actually am not kidding. I have no idea what. If you've been tuning out for the last 20 minutes, go and watch the video of the lecture, or whatever this has been. Okay, this student says, I don't know why this kind of just struck me. It says, this is her burning question. I'm really interested in apathy, and I'd like to learn more about why some people are passionate about apathy, which is kind of a paradox. I was going to study apathy once, but then I was like, what the hell? Who cares? See the dad humor there? Okay. When I was 8 years old, I got stung by 4 jellyfish, so my cousin peed on me. Parentheses. I had to do a double take. Parentheses, it was supposed to help. It did not help. It's a lie. I'm just going to end. I cannot top that. Getting peed on, though, by the cousin was a pretty good touch. Okay, so let's launch into lecture proper. I'm going to give you only one definition today. I'm not really big on definitions, but I think this particular one is helpful. So what is personality? I think we all feel like we know it when we see it, but we personality psychologists actually have a definition. So what do we say? It's kind of technical, but I want to try to break it down for you. Characteristic pattern of behavior, your thoughts, your feelings. So it's what you do, it's what you think, it's what you feel, or, emote over. And because it's your characteristic pattern, that implies that this pattern is stable over time. So it's not like you're just that way every once in a while. It's like that's kind of your baseline. That's what you're like. And across situations. So it's not just like, oh, well, if you're talkative, you're talkative and chatty. Anybody like this, by the way? Where, like, if you're alone with, like, your very closest friends, you're super, super, super talkative and chatty, but, like, anywhere else, pretty much, you're, like, really reserved. Anybody like that? Anybody like that? Right? So we wouldn't say, oh, personality to be chatty or to be talkative or to be extroverted. That's actually a characteristic, what I just described, a characteristic of introverts, interestingly enough. Believe me, we'll break that down more later. Okay, so we insist that if it's really part of your personality, it's got to be fairly stable. Now, why? In part because we've discovered, and you've all discovered this on your own, that people can have sort of one-off instances of, behaving in a way that's uncharacteristic, thinking in a way that's uncharacteristic, feeling something that they don't normally feel. You ever have a friend that you've never seen angry? And then one day you see them, like, enraged? Or maybe you've been that person. And have you ever been in that situation? Are any of you not angry very often? And all of a sudden, like, you're really, really angry, and people are looking at you like, who are you right now? Like, I don't even know this person. Anybody had that? Where somebody's like, I don't even know who you are right now. Okay, I'll see if I can make it hit even closer to home. How many of you, and I want you to be brutally honest, how many of you at some point over the last month, in some instance, have acted like an asshole? Can I see a show of hands? Oh, God bless you, all you. Now, I can't let that one go without getting an example, a good example of your, in that moment, assholishness. Anyone? I think we got to take her right up here.
So my birthday was last week, and my boyfriend came from out of town where he lives to come and he wanted to buy me shoes and all this stuff. But because we were running short on time and I couldn't even process how we were going to buy the shoes, he had a plan, but I just told him I didn't want them anyway and started just panicking because I didn't know what to do about the time, and then walked back to the car, and he went to the shoe store by himself, and I just sat in the car and pouted.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a great example. Thank you. Did it have a happy ending, at least? You had the shoes. Oh, are those the shoes? Can you demonstrate? Well, you can just stand out here so people can see. These are awesome. Aren't they great? Yeah. Well, I'm glad it had a happy ending. Thank you very much. Did you have a story as well? Okay, Brian, go ahead. I got him since I'm right here.
I was just not in a very good mood, and my girlfriend was in the dining area of our apartment, and I was in the kitchen washing a dish, and she spilled a glass, accidentally knocked over a glass of water, and said, "Oh, can you hand me a paper towel real quick? They're right there." And I was like, "No, can't you clean it up? You spilled it."
Yeah, that always goes over well, doesn't it? Yeah, my man. Thank you, Brian. That's a great example. Okay, so now here's the really definitive question. Most of you raised your hand. Most of you have been an asshole at some point over the last month. How many of you? This is where the rubber hits the road. How many of you believe it is part of your personality that you actually are, to a first approximation, an asshole? How many of you are oh my God, I love it. I just, the honesty here is just staggering. So I gotta, can I put any of those folks on the spot? Can anybody tell me about your assholishness? Go ahead.
I guess, I'm really quick to get angry, and I just laugh. This is my sister, so she knows.
She's nodding vigorously. I'm just like, man, you better duck.
So, whenever I get angry, I get really snarky, and I don't know, I'm just kind of a dick sometimes, and I think it's part of my personality, so.
That's outstanding. Thank you. Obviously, or your sister wouldn't be hanging out. Well, you might be paying her. I don't know. But does somebody else have their hand up here? Yeah. Go ahead. Wait, you got to tell us your name first.
I'm Alina. I wouldn't say I'm an asshole. I would more say, I'm just if I'm not in a good mood, I'm a really grumpy person, and I'm just kind of don't talk to me, don't look at me, just mind your business, stop staring at me. But I think I really honestly get that from my dad, because he's kind of been like that with the kids, and sometimes he'll be like, get out of the room and leave me alone. So, you kind of pick up on that from your parents too. So yeah. And he can be a little selfish sometimes, so I can say I kind of picked up off that growing up too.
That's a great example. Thank you for your honesty too. That's my daughter. By the way, that was part of the Alardi drinking game. Is any reference of my daughter, because we're really tight. But she, you know what her comment was to me earlier this summer? She's like, "Dad, you're going to be one of those really cranky old men." And she's like, "I got a newsflash for you. You're already well on your way." On both fronts. No, she was being, I laughed hilariously. I could take it. Did you have somebody else over here? Nobody? Yeah, okay. Well, let's move on then. So, what's the difference? Most of us will exhibit behavior that's consistent with virtually any personality trait, any pattern of thoughts, behavior, feelings, in certain situations, on a sort of one-off. But if we're going to be referring to it as your personality, it's got to be stable. We want to see consistency. We're going to dive into that a lot more next week. But for now, let's just suffice it to say that this will serve as a good working definition. Since I've taken the time to actually talk about it, it's probably going to show up on the exam as something that you want to at least be able to recognize. Okay, now, here's where it gets a lot more fun. So here's a diagram that I made some years ago. It's up on Blackboard. Don't feel like you got to recapitulate it from the comfort of your seat right now, although you're welcome to. But the basic idea here is, what are the different ways that people have tried to account for your personality? So this box here, this boxes and arrows, right? This box is meant to depict your personality in a schematic, symbolic form, which is this constellation of behavior, thoughts, and feelings, and how they influence one another within your personality. So you got the stable pattern of thoughts, behavior, feelings, and then what causes it. Now here's the deal. This is where it gets kind of fun, I think. Over the last, we'll say, century and a half or so, since there's been an actual academic discipline of psychology, various psychologists have attempted to explain personality. What causes it? What is it that makes you the way you are? About 6 major different ways. That's kind of an arbitrary number, but I'm going to say roughly 6 major ways in which psychologists have attempted to account for what is causing your personality. Now, what tends to happen in a young science, and by many metrics, psychology is still a fairly young, or at least, how about this, and I know this sounds a little bit pejorative, immature science. One of the hallmarks of immature science is you get groups of scholars that rally around these little schools of thought where they're like, this is the whole ball game. Our little pet theory accounts for everything. And then they basically ignore all the stuff that doesn't fit their theory. Does that make sense? So they're like, well, so for example, it's easy to pick on Sigmund Freud. We're going to actually try to have a very charitable look at Freud, at least in part, this semester. But Freud, as most of you probably know, since you've all taken intro psych, Freud founded the psychoanalytic theory, the psychoanalytic school of thought of explaining personality, and he was obsessed with the influence of early environment, in particular experiences that you've had with your parents. We'll unpack that in just a little bit. That influence on personality. Well, he wanted to say that that was the whole ballgame, and conveniently ignored a lot of what was happening in the brain, in part because when Freud was writing, brain science was almost non-existent, or at least it was very much in its infancy. Ignored what was going on in genes. Why? Because in Freud's day, Watson and Crick and Rosalind Carter, Franklin had not come along yet, and we didn't even know about DNA. And so it was easy for Freud to ignore all this stuff. He ignored a lot of the stuff that behaviorists are interested in, which is like, what's your environment doing, and how are you being shaped by the rewards and punishments in your environment? Okay, what's my point? Well, we are, over the course of this semester, going to look at personality through the lens of these 6 different theoretical perspectives. They all have some advantages. They all have some disadvantages. And we'll try to be attentive to what those are, where they actually help us understand personality, where they don't. And then we're going to do something that I'm really passionate about, which is to be thinking about how can we connect the dots, how can we fill in the gaps of what's missing between these different theories. In other words, is it possible to put together an integrated perspective that accounts for everything we know from all of these different lines of evidence? Does that make sense? If that seems a little bit too abstract for you right now, I promise it should seem more concrete and more interesting for you as we go along. All right, so let's just start with the biological model. So biological model, major tenet of, the basic idea is we are going to, through the lens of the biological model, we're going to try to account for your personality on the basis of what's happening in your brain. So, in other words, biological is obsessed with your physiology, which is the biological stuff that's happening in your body, particularly in your brain. Now, it doesn't ignore stuff that's happening in the rest of your body. So, hormones that are secreted by various tissues of the body, they can travel up into the brain and influence it. What you eat can influence your brain. What you do with your body, in terms of being sedentary or moving, can influence your brain. All that stuff is accounted for in the biological model. But the major tenet here, the major principle is your mind is what your brain is doing. So what does that mean? Drawing from computer science and artificial intelligence, the basic idea is your brain is a very sophisticated computational device. Your brain actually does compute information. If you're keeping score at home, it's been estimated that it calculates roughly 100, you don't have to write this number down yet, but if you want to, that's fine. Roughly 100 trillion with a T operations per second. Super, super powerful computational device. Your brain is this 3-pound organ. It weighs roughly 3 pounds. It's about, if you want to get a feel for the size of it, you could take your, if you wanted to just put your pen down, take your 2 fists, put them together like that and look at it. From your wrist on up, that's about the size of your brain. It's not that big. 3 pounds of this sort of gelatinous mass. That 3-pound organ, think about this for a second. It doesn't do anything mechanical to aid your survival. It doesn't do anything chemically to aid your survival. It doesn't do anything metabolically to aid your survival. In fact, it is metabolically super greedy tissue. What do I mean by that? Brain uses like at least 25% of all of your energy. It's incredibly greedy for energy, and it doesn't do anything for you except process information for the adaptive regulation of your body and your behavior. In other words, why do we have brains? They are the onboard computers that help guide us through this life. And the idea from the biological model is that brain events, as the brain is processing information, that is the underlying cause of all of our mental events. Our mental life is simply a reflection of our neurological life. You may see me scrambling around for my phone. Why? Because I think sometimes if we look at a so here's a really powerful computational device, as you may have heard, and I've got an old phone. I'm really envious of any of you who have I'm an iPhone guy. Anybody have like the 10 or the 8? I'm so jealous. This is 6S. It still gets the job done. I have in my hand more computational power than NASA had when they landed 3 guys on the moon back in 1969. Out of all their rooms full of supercomputers, I have more computational power right here in my hand. And I don't know if you ever think about this. You've got these apps on your phone, right? You've got all these different programs, these apps. And the whole point of having the phone is the apps, right? Does that make sense? The whole point of why do you have the phone? So you can run the apps. Now, is there such a thing as an app that's not on a phone or some other computational device? I mean, you could run it on an iPad or something, but does an app exist when it's not actually running on something? No. No, it doesn't, right? You only see the app when it's running on a hardware platform. So notice where I'm going with this analogy. The app, the software, that's like your mind. The hardware, which is to say these silicon microcircuits that are embedded in this powerful processor and so forth, and the memory chips that are in this phone, that's like your brain. That's like the hardware. And they're inextricably bound. Anything you do to change the software, like, do you ever do that annoying iOS or whatever the Android equivalent is, the upgrade, and it's like it's kind of dead in the water while you're waiting for it to upgrade? Well, all you're doing is changing the software while your operating system is updating. But let me ask it in the form of a question. When you are changing the software, does that change anything physical in the actual phone? It does. You're shaking your head. No, I mean, what does it do? It changes the magnetic polarity. Every single piece of information in your phone is like a 1 or a 0, right? Which is represented as, like, is that little tiny molecular circuit on or off? What's the polarity? That's a physical state. So, I hope this isn't too abstract for you, but the physical state of your phone changes every time it processes a piece of information. So what does that mean? The software, the mind of your phone, is changing the hardware, the brain. But anything you do to change the hardware is also going to change the software. In other words, the hardware and the software, the mind and the brain, are flip sides of one unitary reality. They're inextricably woven together. And in some respects, it's not even a fully coherent thing to talk about one without also recognizing that the other is the flip side of that same reality. Now, does that mean, by the way, if you accept this premise, that the mind is what the brain does that mean that the mind is somehow unimportant? Because in principle now, you could reduce every thought, feeling, and behavior to a brain state. Do you see where I'm going with this? The claim is, if the mind is what the brain does, then in principle, you could account for every thought. Do you believe this, by the way, that if we someday developed high-resolution brain scan, that we could, at a molecular level, see every single molecular state of your brain, or a person's brain, that we could then, in principle, tell exactly what they're thinking? We already have little inklings that this is true. We can put somebody in and by the way, our resolution of our neuroimaging today is really crappy. Right now, you've heard of magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, and functional MRI. Well, so you can use an MRI to get a sense of like what parts of the brain are lit up or not, how active they are right now. But you know what you're doing? You're summing across millions of neurons averaged over seconds of activity. That's not very high res. What we want is thousandths of a second down to the molecule level. We're not there yet, but we'll get there. Even with our crappy imaging technology today, what can we do? We can put somebody in a scanner, and we can say, okay, we got the scanner turned on right now. I want you to pull up in your mind's eye, I want you to think about and visualize either, you ready for this? Either the face of your best friend, your favorite landscape, or some building that you know well. You with me? Okay, so you close your eyes, and you're like, okay, I'm either going to think about, one of those three things. And based on the pattern of brain activity, they can tell with a very high degree of accuracy anytime you are pulling up the face of your best friend. Why? Because your brain has dedicated circuitry. Do you know this? Dedicated circuitry for facial recognition. And if you happen to be unlucky enough to have a stroke or an injury that knocks out that particular, it's a little tiny area in your visual association cortex in the back of the brain. If you're keeping score at home, it's called the fusiform gyrus. You don't have to know it right now. But if something knocks out the fusiform gyrus, then all of a sudden you go face blind. And there's a really famous book some of you may have heard of called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Have you read it? Have you read it? It's pretty awesome, right? By the really eminent neurologist Oliver Sacks, who's a brilliant writer. And he gives you all these case studies of people that have had their fusiform gyrus knocked out. I mean, does a lot of other case studies as well. But they cannot even recognize their wife. They cannot even recognize their kids. They're just face blind. Why? Because with the hardware knocked out, the software is knocked out. Okay, so if we put you in a scanner and you pull up the face of your best friend, guess what? We can see your fusiform gyrus on the scanner light up like a Christmas tree. And we're like, damn. But wait, it gets better. We could say, either pull up the face of your best friend, or as best you can, that random dude that checked you out at the grocery store yesterday that you've never seen before, or some stranger that you saw today. Guess what? When you pull up the face of the stranger, we can look at your amygdala, which you don't have to know about yet, which is a sort of ground zero for registering emotional significance. And the amygdala is kind of flatlining. It's like, yeah, random dude, whatever. And if you think of your best friend, the amygdala gets really, really hot, part of it, at least. It's like, no, that's really, oh, my friend. Or, by the way, if it's your favorite pet, some of you are more strongly attached to your pets than people. Have you ever had somebody say to you, does it make me a bad person that I like dogs more than people? Some of you are nodding like, amen. I don't share that sentiment, but I do love dogs a lot. People with autism, you know about autism? have been shown, they often form really intense attachments to objects, physical objects. And some kids with autism have been put in the scanner, and when they look at a face of one of their family members, they look at then one of their favorite objects, and the amygdala is like, oh, my slide rule, Seriously. Now, what does that mean? It means, in principle, if this claim is correct, that the mind is what the brain does, that every single one of your thoughts, feelings, wishes, dreams is reflected in brain activity, and vice versa. Now, a lot of people don't like this idea very much, and I have to be honest, I didn't like it very much when I first encountered it many years ago. Why? Anybody have any issues with it? Anybody? Anyone that? Yeah. I think I saw that hand. Can you get back to her? And then I'll get this one right here. I'll go ahead and get you since you're right here.
I was going to say it doesn't take into account like your experiences and like things that you've been through in life and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. It may sound like that. Maybe that was just maybe I didn't do a great job of clarifying. It actually does. It just says that your experiences are feeding new data into the program. And that as that new data gets into the program, it's like when your phone, do you ever have it do the thing where somebody emails you? My phone's really good about this. It'll take contacts out of my email and suggest, it'll remember, like if that person texts me for the first time, it'll say, hey, I think this is that person that wrote you this email last week. Can I give them that name? And then it'll actually change the memory right? So the biological model will just say that your experiences lay down new memory traces in your brain, but they're in the brain. So when you learn something, it's only ever learned by changing what's in your brain, changing the memory states. Yes, go ahead.
It kind of dehumanizes you.
I can't hear you.
It kind of dehumanizes you because we like to think that we're all abstract and unique, but if really you can see all of this, it kind of just makes us computers.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy, isn't it? I mean, I really appreciate you saying that because that was exactly my reaction. The first time I encountered it, I kind of felt like, you guys ever watch the movie The Matrix, the original, The Matrix, with Neo and Morpheus and everything? I kind of felt like Neo. When Morpheus is like, you can take the red pill or the blue pill. Take the blue pill and just go on with your comfortable sort of illusion. And for me, that was like thinking, that my mind was out in the ether somewhere and that it inhabited my body and possessed my body, controlled my body, but was not co-synchronous with my body. The red pill was like, holy shit. This perspective suggests, by the way, I'm not telling you that this is the gospel truth or anything, but through this lens, okay, you ready for this? I hope you're sitting down. You are, good. Through this lens, here you go. You and I are exquisitely sophisticated robots. We are machines made out of primarily carbon atoms, some other elements thrown in there, but basically we're machines made out of organic matter, machines, obeying the laws of physics and processing information, which gives rise to our subjective thoughts and feelings and so forth. But basically, at the end of the day, we are exquisitely sophisticated robots. That's what this perspective is suggesting. And what does that do to cherished notions of, say, free will? Right? Because if you are a machine made out of molecules that at the end of the day are obeying the laws of physics, and it's built up on top of that, like the laws of chemistry and the laws of biochemistry and the laws of information processing. Are you with me? Then at the end of the day, what it's suggesting, I got to write this term down for you, that ultimately the truth of our existence is a type of determinism, which is a fancy philosophical term that means exactly what you might think it means, that everything we do is ultimately determined by forces and influences outside of our control. In other words, ultimately, according to this perspective, we don't have free will in that sort of ultimate philosophical sense any more than, say, the Earth has free will about deciding to change its orbital trajectory around the sun or deciding to change its speed of rotation. Now, there are people, by the way, who think the Earth has free will. Okay, I think they're called Gaians. They are not taken particularly seriously within the mainstream scientific community. Within the mainstream scientific community, we're kind of like the Earth in that example. In other words, we really want to believe we have free will. It feels like we do. And trust me, I feel like I've got free will. I promise you. Right now, from the inside, it feels like I've got free will. But it also feels like this, whatever the hell this big structure is made out of solid stuff. And quantum physics teaches us that it's 99.999% empty space. And that, just owing to the quantum properties of quarks and so forth, it gives the illusion of being completely solid. Like that. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say that when, saying the word determinism, I guess in my mind it's like, okay, so as you're saying, it's something that's completely like, well, if I do A, then B will happen, and then I'll have. Okay, it can be that plain, but to me it's like you're actually going to determine whether you be happy and do the ABC, or whether you are as a and not do ABC and nervous and that, because you do get to choose whether you go this route.
Yeah, that's really, really good. How about this? And I don't want to belabor this point because I don't want any of you to lose too much sleep about this tonight. Although if you lay awake just for a little while tonight thinking about this, let me know because it'll actually make me happy as long as it's not too distressing for you. Just a little bit, okay? I want to push you just a little bit out of your comfort zone. So here's the idea. Here's the idea. Subjectively from the inside, it feels like we are all making freely given choices, right? It feels like we have free will. If you could imagine that your phone was given auto-recursive self-monitoring circuitry so that it could actually have a kind of consciousness and monitor itself, it would probably think that it had free will, that it was choosing. Do you ever have the deal where you're on some website and it's like freakishly making suggestions with the AI? You ever do? It's like, Spotify, and it'll say, or Pandora or something, it'll say, hey, I think you'll like this song. Or Amazon will say, hey, I think you'd really be interested in purchasing this. And you're looking at it and you're like, oh, that's scary. You ever have that where it's recommending a new song and you're like, I really love this. How do they know? Okay, so if this phone had been given self-recursive, self-monitoring software to monitor itself so that it thinks as it's making suggestions, probably it's going to feel like it's doing it out of free will, right? Because it's not aware of the puppet master pulling the strings behind. What's that? The actual code that is causing it to make those recommendations. The idea from the biological model is, from the inside, it totally feels like we're making free choices. Why? Because we don't have a God's eye view to look down at our programming and know what our programming is actually leading us to choose. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to tell you, by the way, that you don't have free will. In fact, if I've freaked you out right now, if I'm going to make you lose too much sleep, I will tell you that there is a perspective we're going to study this semester called the existential approach. The existential model right here, that basically is going to say science has limits. Science can't, in principle, science can't tell us everything, and it feels like we have free will. So we can't rule out the possibility that we do. Why? Because there are some things about our subjective experience that science can't yet explain. I'll try to unpack all that in about 2.5 months when we cover that. But just suffice it to say that the jury's still a little bit out on this question. Now, what else can we say about the biological model? How about this? It is
we have a question.
Oh, we got a question. Yeah, go ahead.
We talked about this kind of in neuroscience last semester, and it was like 300 milliseconds before you do an act, there's activation in the area. So it's like, is it really you doing the action But we also found that you get like a last chance to say like, no, I'm not going to do that thing. So is that kind of change that a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's really, I actually, that's a really famous experiment where they ask people to track, on a clock or to press a button, like when they think they've made a choice, to, like, they can give them a choice of, like, choose, one of the 3 options or something. And what they find is they're doing a brain scan, and they can tell about a half second or 3/10 of a second before the person is consciously aware of what they've chosen. They can already tell they've made the choice by the brain image. Ultimately, this perspective doesn't even hinge on experiments like that. I think experiments like that add fuel to the fire and give us a sense of, well, wait a minute. If you weren't even consciously aware of what you were going to choose before your brain was, right, then how much did you actually consciously make that choice? In other words, no matter what we're consciously aware of, there are brain events going on behind the scenes to make us consciously aware of it. So it gets very deep really quickly. All right, let's move on. Okay, so to understand personality, we have to understand what's going on in the brain from this perspective. Let's say just a word real quickly about genes, then we're going to move on, talk about some other perspectives. Genes, I put up in this little schematic up here. Notice they are feeding into our biology. Why? Well, what do genes do? Most people who are not very scientifically literate, which I trust includes none of you, but people who are not very scientifically literate, when they think of genes, if you were to just ask random people, at the state fair or something, what do your genes do? The most coherent answer you get from a lot of people would be something like, well, they're like the blueprint to build your body. While you're gestating in utero, they wouldn't put it that way, but while your body's being woven together in the womb, your genes are giving the blueprint for that building program. That turns out to be a really misleading image. It's more like a recipe than a blueprint for the sort of the baking of a body as it's gestating in the womb. But your genes are so much more. Why? Here's the part that most people miss. Your genes that are embedded in the DNA that's in the nucleus of almost every single one of your cells, not your blood cells, but all other cells, your DNA is the operating system for every cell in your body. And every cell in your body, including every cell in your brain, we call them neurons, every cell in your body is like a little factory, a little robot, basically, with its own operating system that is processing literally thousands of different things every second. It's making all kinds of proteins and other factors and clearing out waste products. It's doing all this stuff. If you could be shrunk down to the size of a molecule and hang out in one of your cells, you would freak out. Because stuff would be whizzing past so quickly, you wouldn't be able to process it. You'd have to slow it down by a factor of 500 just to be able to sort of hope to have a chance of catching up with all the stuff that's going on in every single cell of the body. Why am I telling you this? Because the conductor of all that activity is your DNA in real time. In other words, your genes are the real-time operating system of these fantastically complex automatons that are your cells, of which you have about 10 trillion, including about 100 billion with a B in your brain. What does that mean? Genes are super important because a lot of that operating system, in fact, most of it for your cells, comes off the shelf from the moment of conception. Most of it is not reprogrammed completely by your experience. Now, experience can modify, experience can shape, sort of which genes get turned up or down, but it doesn't change the code of your DNA itself. That code comes off the shelf from the moment of conception. So, as you might guess, genes may have a lot to do with our personality. And I'm going to give you a spoiler right now, and I promise we'll unpack it and really look at this in detail later. But for most personality traits, if you wanted to tell the story of how much of your personality, let's say if you're really extroverted, outgoing, versus really introverted, roughly half of that story can be told simply on the basis of knowing your genes. Roughly half the story of how agreeable or disagreeable can be told just on the basis of knowing what's happening in your genes. Roughly half the story of how, do you know this word? Conscientious? You know, how organized and disciplined and locked in and reliable and dependable. Or, on the other side of it, how much of a slacker, how much of a, yeah, whatever, you know, sort of attitude you might have. How much you procrastinate, how much you are disorganized. Half of that story, roughly, can be told just on the basis of knowing what your genes are. And this has profound and staggering consequences. By the way, notice this is not complete genetic determinism. There's not a single personality trait that's ever been discovered that is 100% explained by genes. Experience matters. Experience matters. Our lived experience in a lived environment does shape us, but it doesn't fully shape us. A lot of who we are. Oh, by the way, somebody mentioned earlier, did you notice somebody said, was talking about seeing affinities with their dad, and like, oh, you know, I picked this up from, like, here's a trait, and I picked this up from my dad. And the implication was, my dad modeled it. My dad shaped me to be this way. That is possible, but as a personality scientist, the first thing I thought of is, it's quite likely you and your dad also share half of your DNA. Right? Without a paternity test, we don't know for sure, but well, oh, that's too dark. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's so dark, twisted. Nobody even wants to go there. I just found out somebody really close to me, his wife has been having an affair for years, so I'm kind of primed because they have 2 kids. And I was like, those kids don't really look too much like... I know, I'm sorry, I'm a bad person. Okay, where was I? Genes, modified by experience. Anybody have any questions about that before we move on? No, good. Okay, let's talk about the psychoanalytic model. So this is Freud, right? Freud had this idea, really influential. By the way, he started writing back in the 1890s, so about 120 years ago. Here's the thing people miss about Freud. He basically posited that there are these critical stages of psychological development. So, your early environment has these critical stages, almost like imprinting. And I'm going to invoke the name of a famous scholar or scientist in this area that some of you have heard of. His name is Konrad Lorenz. I want you to know that last name, Lorenz. Does anybody remember what his famous experiment was to show the power of imprinting? Is this totally new to all of you? Totally new? Do you remember?
It's not the one where they had them shock.
No, there were no people or animals were harmed in the filming of this particular. Do you know? Not separated twins. No. Do you know? Was it ducks? No, but you're very close. It was another type of very closely related waterfowl. Swans? No. Geese? Yes. Geese. 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 By the way, geese are the bane of my existence because we have a pond in our backyard, and the geese love our pond. Geese are very cute. They're adorable. They're lovely. They poop like nobody's business, and they like to eat grass and pull it up by the roots so that you just have bald spots in your yard. Just note to self, okay? But they're also really, really smart, adorable animals. Konrad Lorenz discovered that they are programmed at basically conception, presumably, that when they hatch, he had observed, like others who had studied geese, that they are very strongly bonded when they hatch with their mom. And they, if you've ever seen little goslings, they're super cute. They trail along behind the mama and they follow her very closely everywhere for the first few months of their life. Now, Lorenz had this idea that the program that allowed them to imprint to their mother, I mean, if you were going to program that cybernetically into a robot, you probably wouldn't go to the extravagance of saying, like, you know, you need to make sure that that's actually your mom. You need to, like, do some sort of, you know, thorough vetting before you... Probably the simplest program would be, hey, within a few hours after you hatch, the very first thing that you see moving, that's your mom. Follow it. Bond to it. Fall in love with it immediately. Okay? That was Lorenz's hypothesis. So he decided that he would get into proximity to goose eggs that were about to hatch, and he was going to be mom. So they hatched, and he there, hey, little fella, hey, little gal, you know, and he would feed them, and they just started, mama, mama, and they'd follow him around for the next several months of their life. Anywhere he went, the geese were trailing behind. And he demonstrated there's this critical window of imprinting. He also demonstrated that if you wait too long and they don't have this imprinting figure, they will never imprint to anything or anyone. Even if you bring their actual mom in, like a few days later, they won't imprint. It's too late. They missed the window. By the way, there's been a similar experiment that's been done. This is very upsetting, those of you like me who love cats as well. I love cats and dogs. I had both growing up. Any cat lovers here, by the way? Any cat lovers? No, really, you can be big and proud. And any dog lovers? Fellow dog lovers? Yeah, a lot more. By the way, did you know there are personality implications of whether or not you are a cat lover or dog lover? I'll tell you later. I don't have time today. You can be thinking about what you think cat lovers versus dog. There's real science to this. Okay, so with cats, you know what they found? The visual cortex of a cat, the part of the brain that registers their eyesight and that helps them recognize stuff in the world, has a critical window of development. Just like the ducks with the imprinting, if you have kittens that are taken from the womb, actually I think this is really sad, they actually operated on some of them while they were still gestating and either sewed their eyelids shut or temporarily disconnected the optic nerve, or blocked it. I know, this makes me really upset to talk about, but I'm only doing it just for the sake of the scientific finding, and then we can all condemn how horrible this experiment is. What they showed is that if the kittens are not allowed to see, to get feedback through their retina of their eyes into their visual association cortex within the first couple months of life, you can then open their eyes, give them a perfectly normal experience, and they'll be blind for the rest of their life. Critical window of development. In other words, if the circuits that have that program don't get the right input at the right time, the program's never going to work right. Freud had the same idea. That's why I took the time to talk about that. Freud had the same idea. His idea is, you've got these critical windows. When you're really little, you're completely dependent on mom, and you're probably breastfeeding, or maybe she's holding you, nurturing you, bottle feeding you, or a mom surrogate is bottle feeding you, and that's the window where you're to learn how to bond to people, like the goslings. And later on, you got to deal with potty training, and it's all about control. We'll talk about that a whole lot more later. And if you don't get the right kind of guidance, if your parents screw it up, if they're too harsh, they're too permissive, then that's not going to go well, and you're going to have trouble with control issues for the rest of your life. You see how that works? It's a really interesting hypothesis. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. We're not going to judge it right now, but I just wanted to give you the basic flavor for it. Question way in the back there, sir. Can you? He's got you covered. He's running. This is great.
I had a question about, so when they sew their eyelids shut, doesn't the body kind of invest in its other senses so it can adapt to its environment rather than just an imprinting they can see? Like, did they do like a refractory test on their eyes to see like they're dilating and opening and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I don't know. I've never taken the deep dive. I can find out for you, though. It's a really interesting question. Yeah, I was just getting a really cursory sort of, like, oh, cool, it fits the same pattern of this critical window of development. Yeah. All right. So what else to say about Freud? He basically believed, how about this, that if it goes well for you during the first several years of your life with all these critical windows, that you're probably going to have a well-developed, healthy adult personality. And if it goes badly for you, you're probably going to get fixated, you're going to get stuck. And unless you're lucky enough to be under the tutelage and guidance and therapeutic touch of a gifted psychoanalyst, preferably one trained by Freud himself, that you're probably doomed to keep repeating the same mistakes for the rest of your life. So Freud had a pretty gloomy outlook. We'll talk, again, a lot more about that when we take a deeper dive on that. One last claim that Freud made that has actually held up really, really well is, and by the way, he was ridiculed for this when he first made this claim, is that most of your mind is unconscious. In other words, Freud believed, even though he didn't have a lot of evidence for it at the time, that how about this? That most of what's happening in our brain we are not consciously aware of. That most of what's happening in your mind you are not consciously aware of. Freud was ridiculed for it at the time, in part because we didn't have brain scan technology, but now that we have it, modern neuroscientists have Freud's back on this one. Modern neuroscientists are like, Freud, you nailed it, because we can actually demonstrate that the vast majority of what's happening in our minds we have no conscious awareness of. Point A. Keep your notebooks out, if you would, for one more minute, okay? I'll make a deal with you. I have a pet peeve. Some of you may share it. It's the rattling and rustling of papers and notebooks and stuff, starting about 3 minutes before the end of class. It's really disruptive. But if you can refrain from that, when we get to roughly 12, 13, 14, I will say 14, if it's quiet, I'll let you out a minute early, okay? And I know that's such a big incentive. We'll make it 2 minutes. Okay, is it? Fuck it. Okay, you guys have a great weekend. I'll be here just like last time if you want to come up and say, hey, I got to meet 15 or 20 of you last time. I want to meet some more folks today. Come up and say, oh, but wait, there's more. Wait, there's more. You have your chance to get your official 320 name tag and your photo opportunity with our very own Cody Washington.